Her phone lights up at 11 minutes past midnight. A message from someone she met 9 days ago. She reads it twice, then a third time. Slower, and she feels something she hasn't felt in a long while. Understood, not liked, not flattered. Understood the way you feel when someone names the exact thing you didn't have words for yet. She doesn't know it yet, but that feeling is doing something to her. Something automatic, something old, something that has almost nothing to do with him, and everything to do with how trust actually works. Because trust was never built to protect us from manipulation. It was built to make connection possible in the first place. And anything that makes connection possible can be borrowed by someone who isn't offering connection at all, only the appearance of it, delivered on a much faster schedule. So here is the question this documentary sits inside. Why does the feeling of being deeply understood so often arrive fastest with the people who understand us least? Picture a coffee shop, rain on the window, the smell of wet pavement drifting in each time the door opens. Two people meeting for the second time. He laughs at the same moment she does. He orders what she orders, almost by accident. He tells her, quietly, that he's never been able to talk to anyone the way he's talking to her. It doesn't feel like a line. It feels like relief. What she's responding to has a name, though nobody in the room would use it out loud. Psychologists call it mirroring, matching another person's tone, pace, and posture closely enough that the brain reads them as familiar. And to an old, simple part of the brain, familiar means safe. This isn't inherently dishonest. Most people mirror each other a little, without meaning anything by it. Friendships form this way. So do marriages. Somewhere in every healthy relationship, two people start finishing each other's sentences. The difference tends to be timing. Genuine closeness usually arrives slowly, built from small moments that accumulate over months, sometimes years. Manipulation tends to compress that timeline, offering the depth of a 10-year friendship in the space of 10 days. The psychologist Robert Cialdini spent decades studying why people say yes to each other. He found that liking and similarity are two of the strongest forces in human persuasion, not because people are gullible, but because noticing similarity is one of the fastest ways the brain decides who is on our side. A manipulator doesn't need to understand you. They only need to reflect you back to yourself quickly enough that you mistake the mirror for a window. And once that mirror is in place, something else becomes possible. Not a lie. Exactly. An invitation. We rarely fall for manipulation because someone convinces us of something false. We fall for it because, for a moment, someone hands us the feeling we'd been quietly missing, and we forget to ask where they got it from. Which raises the next question. Why does trust, once it starts, seem to grow faster than the evidence for it? A few weeks later, in this same story, a small favor gets asked. Nothing dramatic, a ride somewhere, a late-night phone call, help with something that could have waited until morning. She says yes. It costs her almost nothing. Then another favor, slightly bigger this time. She says yes again, and something quiet happens in her mind on the way to that yes. She doesn't just agree to the favor. She updates her sense of who she is inside this relationship. Someone generous, someone who shows up when it matters. The psychologist Leon Festinger described this pull decades ago. He called it cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding two conflicting ideas at once. If she's a generous person who keeps saying yes to this man, then stepping back now would mean admitting something uncomfortable, that maybe she's been generous with the wrong person. It's easier, in the moment, to keep being generous. This is sometimes called the foot in the door effect, and it rarely looks like a technique from the inside. It looks like commitment. It looks like loyalty, or love, or simply being a decent person who doesn't bail on people. Small yeses don't just grant small requests. They quietly rewrite identity, one agreement at a time, until refusing starts to feel like betraying yourself rather than protecting yourself. By the time the requests grow larger, money, secrecy, distance from friends who might ask questions, she isn't really deciding whether to trust a stranger anymore. She's defending a version of herself she already helped build. This is one of the harder truths in this story. Manipulation rarely asks you to believe something untrue about the manipulator. More often, it asks you to believe something flattering about yourself, and then quietly makes that belief expensive to abandon. And that leads somewhere stranger still. Why does uncertainty, of all things, seem to deepen attachment instead of ending it? Later in the story, the warmth stops arriving on schedule. Some days he's fully present, funny, attentive, the same person from the coffee shop. Other days he goes quiet for reasons she can't quite name. She finds herself checking her phone more, not less. Rereading old messages, searching for the exact sentence where things changed. This pattern has a name too, borrowed from a much older corner of psychology. B.F. Skinner, studying reward and behavior, found that responses reinforced unpredictably are harder to extinguish than responses reinforced every single time. A reward you can count on is comforting. A reward you can't predict is compelling, in a way that steady kindness rarely manages. Slot machines are built on this principle. So, unfortunately, are some relationships. Some researchers have connected this to how early attachment forms the idea, associated with John Bowlby, that we learn what closeness feels like from our earliest relationships, and that inconsistency in caregiving can teach a nervous system to associate love with vigilance rather than ease. This remains an active area of debate, and it doesn't mean every uncertain relationship is echoing childhood. But it may help explain why unpredictability doesn't always push people away. Sometimes it holds their attention more tightly than consistency ever could. There's a philosophical thread hiding inside this too. Humans don't just want comfort. We want resolution and ending to whichever story we're currently living inside. An unpredictable partner keeps that story open. And an open story is very hard to walk away from, because leaving means it never gets resolved. Manipulation doesn't need to feel good to hold someone in place. It only needs to feel unfinished. We rarely miss the person exactly as they were. We miss the ending we hadn't gotten to yet. It's worth pausing here, because this pattern doesn't only live in romance. Picture an office elevator, 6 months into a new job. A manager she's admired from a distance steps in beside her, and in the 30 seconds before the doors open, he tells her she's the most promising hire the team has had in years. He isn't wrong to notice her, but he says something close to it to 3 other people that same month, in almost the same tone, in almost the same elevator. Workplaces run on trust the same way relationships do, which means the same shortcuts tend to work in both places. A leader who learns someone's specific insecurity, that they feel overlooked, that they doubt their own instincts, can offer exactly the reassurance that insecurity has been starving for, and call it mentorship. Often at first, it genuinely is mentorship. That's what makes it difficult to name later. The praise is real enough to feel earned, generous enough to feel personal, and consistent enough that when he eventually asks her to stay quiet about a decision or absorb blame for something that wasn't hers, it barely registers as a request. It registers as returning a favor. Manipulation tends to borrow the shape of whatever room it's standing in. In a coffee shop, it looks like chemistry. In an office, it looks like opportunity. In a family, it can look like loyalty. The costume changes from setting to setting. The underlying mechanism, small deposits of trust, cashed in gradually, tends to stay remarkably similar, which brings the story to its harder question. Why, by the end of experiences like this, do so many people doubt themselves before they think to doubt the person who hurt them? This is the part most documentaries skip. because it's the least visible from the outside. Somewhere in the middle of it, she starts double-checking her own memory. Did he really say that? Did she overreact? She finds herself explaining his behavior to her friends before they've even asked her to. This isn't weakness. It's what happens when someone else's version of events gets repeated more often, and with more confidence than your own. Psychologists sometimes describe this as an erosion of epistemic trust, a quiet transfer of authority over what's real, from your own perception to someone else's narrative. It rarely happens through one dramatic lie. It happens through small corrections, offered often enough that checking with yourself starts to feel unreliable, and checking with them starts to feel necessary. Around the same time, the world outside the relationship tends to get smaller, not through any single decision, but through 100 quiet ones, a friend she stops calling because it causes an argument, a family visit she skips because it isn't worth the aftermath. Isolation, in stories like this one, rarely announces itself as isolation. It arrives disguised as keeping the peace. By the time she recognizes the pattern, she isn't just untangling a relationship. She's relearning how to trust her own perception again, from the ground up. And this is worth saying plainly. None of this makes her, or anyone in a position like hers, foolish. The very qualities that make someone a good friend, a generous partner, an open and hopeful person, these are exactly the qualities manipulation depends on. It doesn't usually target the gullible. It targets the willing. So we return to where this started. Trust was never the flaw in this story. Trust is simply the door every relationship needs, kind or otherwise, in order to open at all. Manipulation doesn't break down that door. It knocks politely, mirrors your voice back to you, asks for small things before large ones, and lets uncertainty do the work that consistency never could. Each part, taken alone, looks almost harmless, a compliment, a favor, a quiet evening followed by a quieter one. It's only in hindsight, looking at the whole shape of it, that the pattern becomes visible. That's part of what makes this so hard to protect against in the moment. We tend to look for manipulation the way we look for a villain, someone who feels wrong from the first conversation. But the people who are best at this rarely feel wrong. They feel like the answer to something we'd been quietly hoping for. We don't fall for it because we're careless. We fall for it because, for a moment, it feels like the fastest route to being known, and being known is one of the oldest needs we carry, older than any single relationship, older than the ability to name it. Maybe the goal was never to trust less. Maybe it's learning to notice the difference between someone who earns understanding slowly, over time, through attention that doesn't ask for anything back, and someone who offers you that same understanding all at once, gift-wrapped, before they've asked you a single real question about who you actually are. Slow understanding tends to survive an ordinary Tuesday, when there's nothing to perform for and no one else watching. Borrowed understanding rarely does, because the people who are actually safe rarely need to convince you of it. The ones who do are usually answering a question you never asked.